So the hate speech, Happy Homie apologized. Hopefully him and someone like Kali Kriel or Ernst Roots can talk to each other, let them fight, let them argue in good faith though. Express your frustrations. Don't not get angry, but don't press someone down because you are creating a hero. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the On the podcast.
Am I allowed to swear in here?
In Sweden.
Yeah, I know we said let's not blame the government.
It's just sad when we start them becoming indoctrinated view on me.
In me with the bias here, back with another episode of the On the Contrary podcast. Thank you guys for subscribing. Thank you guys for watching. We are growing slowly. We are having conversations. We're having tough conversations, and we're here to hear a different point of view. I think I have this superpower where I'm able to see things from the other side. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes I see stuff in a manner that I'm good at finding holes or poking holes in a story, which is not to say, it can give the impression that it can mislead you as to which side of the fight I'm on in whatever frivolous or trivial debate they might be out there. The first thing I want to start with, unrelated, but anyway, that's just like an overview of what this podcast is, really. It's just alternate views, opposing views, devil's advocate type of situation. We are not here to antagonize or to punch down, if there's such a thing. We are here to just explore and express ideas and views and have like, what they call those things, thought exercises and all those fancy things. First thing, it seems like, according to, I don't know what happened, I don't know when last I watched SABC, it seems like SABC News either cut the news mid-broadcast or cut like the Afrikaans news completely, and it just didn't happen in its normal time slot. Now it's interesting timing since we're having all this fights about supposed South African government trying to extinguish Afrikaans culture, whether it's with Bellable, whether it's with the fights and diplomatic disasters caused by AfriForum and other political parties, and now SABC seems to have cancelled the Afrikaans news. Now, we'll only find out on Tuesday. This comes out on Tuesday. We'll only find out on Tuesday if the news is back now, because as far as I've seen, SABC News or SABC Nuus, SAK Nuus has not tweeted anything or said anything about anything. So we don't know if it's cancelled or if it was a glitch, but you know we like to jump on stories. But the timing is interesting. Those that are conspiracy theorists will be like, this is intentional. DA is on a rampage. Rightly so. What happened to the news? Please explain. Please account. But then you realize the minister in charge of SABC is a DA minister. Why don't you just ask your minister? Obviously, the minister will speak to the board or operations or whoever's there at the SABC as to what happened there. And then your minister can tell you. And then you can tell us what happened there. No, the interesting thing, which is a thing that I like to be the one informing people about. I've had Robbie Collins on the podcast before, and Robbie Collins is a Durban, a comedian, a colored comedian from Durban, and colored people in Durban, as we know, do not speak Afrikaans, and that is just to show. It's just another show that colored people aren't a people. They aren't one people. Colored is a category. Colored is not a race. In fact, there might be some cultural attachments and links with the so-called colored people because we were put into one category and forced to find each other. Now, why do I bring this up? The interesting and funny thing about the Afrikaans conversation, and I've heard a couple of people speak about it before, I've spoken about it before. People are saying on Twitter that Afrikaans is not even an African language, which even if it wasn't, that's not a fair argument in what we're trying to do. We are trying to be inclusive, or at least that's the idea that I think we're trying to do in South Africa. But obviously there are people who don't feel like that. More about that later. Now, you're saying Afrikaans is not a African language, never mind the fact that it has the word Africa in it. And I've heard AfriForum speak about the reason for the name, the reason why Africa is in Afrikaans. I think even when the language was named Afrikaans, it was not named like that as a good thing. It was named like that to show that it's dirty or it's less sophisticated, that it's broken Dutch. But some might know the story, some might not know the story. So, back in the heyday of Cape colonization and whatever the case might be, there were slaves. There were slaves that worked where Cape Town is now, Mossel Bay, I guess, the whole Western Cape. KZN was known to have Indian slaves from India, but the slaves, way before the slaves came to India, the slaves in the Western Cape came from all over. There were mostly Khoi, San, and other indigenous groups from the Karoo, Western Cape, Namibia areas. There were slaves from there. But then they also brought in slaves from Asian countries, maybe Arabic countries, but they were like the people who are now called Cape Malay. No one has been able to give me a straight answer whether a Cape Malay is Malaysian, if that's the part of Asia that they came from. But Cape Malays are sort of Asian, even though to me they look more Arab because it's a big Muslim community in the Cape. Now, all these people, Khoisans, people from here, people from there, mixed people, were forced to work on the farms and in the kitchens there. Now, I think it was mostly in the kitchens where there was a diversity of slaves there. And they were forced, all of them were forced to use Dutch as a medium of instruction. And as you would have it, people will break the language, people will have different accents, people will speak broken Dutch and substitute their own words. And there's this colloquial thing that's developing amongst the slave community in the Western Cape, which are diverse groups of people. While there's the slave community who's from all over, the mixed race thing is happening because obviously, not obviously, but as we know, in colonization, women get S8. So there's also now a contingent of mixed race people from the white slave owners and the white people in charge were having children with slaves and the workers on their farms or in their homes or whatever the case may be. And that group also forms part of this community of non-whites. Now, what happens to the Dutch language in there? It gets spiced up with Khoisan languages, with some Asian languages. Like I think the word pisang is the one that they use an example of. The word pisang, the root word of it is like none other Dutch or Germanic language, and there's a Asian or Thai that uses a similar root word for a pisang, which is a banana. Like there's things like Kahocha and Dacha, which are Khoisan words, which are now in the Afrikaans language. Now what has happened is, if we can have a real world example of what that is, if we look at what American slaves, the African slaves that were moved from West Africa to America and forced to speak English there, if we see what the Black American slaves did to the English language, like yes massa, no massa, me no, the way they've broken the language, and it's broken English, and it's poorly spoken English, and eventually it becomes a dialect. Now you have things like Southern accents, which is where North South Carolina, Georgia, where slavery, Mississippi, where slavery was rife, where that is actually like a dialect of English. And dialects, once they become different enough, they can be categorized as separate languages. So if we are to hear how Black Americans, especially from the south of USA, speak, you can have an idea of how the slave community in the Western Cape broke the Afrikaans or the Dutch language and infused it with other languages. Now this then would be then known as Kombuis, what do you call it? What is Dutch in Afrikaans? It was called Dirty Dutch or Kombuis. What's the word for Dutch? Either way. But it was called like Kitchen Dutch or Dirty Dutch or African Dutch. When it started being more widely spoken and they would interact with other Dutch people, it would then be called African Dutch. Afrikaans dates. Dates German or... Anyway. But Afrikaans, meaning African Dutch. So this was African Dutch. Then eventually the Dutch went really into what was happening in South Africa. And now the now so-called Afrikaans community, which I've also recently just realized was French, some German, and then mostly Dutch Europeans, white people, who were then mixed and then slowly also was speaking this dirty language. They might have formalized it, or the ones who then developed rules around how to speak it, or at least was able to distill the rules from the way people speak. Then they would then normalize, or what's this word? Acclimate to now being a new people and being completely separated from the Dutch. Now you have this language which has come out of this thing. Most of us are speaking it anyway. Dutch is slowly fading away. This language that was started in the kitchens of slave owners by slaves is now slowly becoming the dominant language in this thing. And then obviously it becomes formalized, it grows, it gets translated. You get the Bible, now you get a Bible, Dutch Bible getting translated to Afrikaans, such and such. That's more or less the history of Afrikaans, the language. I bring it up. Let's see why SABC had a mistake. I would hope they didn't cancel Afrikaans. Whether or not it's to spite Afrikaans people, but we must remember a large part of the Afrikaner community are black people, aka so-called colored people, which can't afford DSTV. I see Rian Cwecwe is on Cwecwe now, so probably most affluent Afrikaners are watching the Afrikaans news on Cwecwe, on DSTV, but the rest of the Afrikaans-speaking colored community, which is a lot of people, is still watching Afrikaans news. And if you have Zulu news, I think you have Zulu and Xhosa news, and then they might be switching between Venda and Tsonga. I don't know, there's news that plays at 5 o'clock and there's news that plays at 6, and it might be Tsonga and Venda. But the different groups of languages are catered for. English, Afrikaans, Zulu, Xhosa, I guess Ndebele and Swati you fit in there somewhere, or maybe there's a separate one. I haven't been on SABC in a while. Another thing, I used to watch on the new digital TV. You can watch like SABC News had its own channel on like normal terrestrial digital TV, but they stopped it. When you bring back the Afrikaans news, can you maybe bring back the news on the news channel? Yeah, that would be nice. I wonder why they stopped it. It was a nice thing. And they have like a sports channel. They have an SABC News channel. I think they have a movie channel. They have an education channel. Like terrestrial TV was becoming nice, man. Nice. My glasses. Okay, that's SABC. So I have the superpower where I see things differently to other people. I look for things that other people aren't seeing. And someone who I think is similar, not trying to say I'm like him or he's like me or whatever. Omi has a dope platform. Omi is a thinker. Omi is a speaker. He speaks to all sorts of people. Whether he agrees with them or doesn't agree with them, he's able to, in good faith, always speak to, being able to agree to aspects of groups that we don't identify with or that we don't subscribe to. Penuel got into trouble for tweeting about the Cwecwe case, and he did say some stuff that were off or misaligned or slightly misinformed, and also that I don't know how else it come across, because he then had to do an apology for his tweet, and then also got slammed for the apology itself. Now, Darren Campher, who's a dope creator, simplifies a lot of these complex concepts. He helps us understand it. He's actually a researcher, and I've actually defended him in many debates. Not that I'm anyone, but I want to speak about our ability to speak freely without the fear of hatred as a response. Because even Penuel's tweet, it did not come from, I didn't see it coming from a place of evil, a place of malintent or maliciousness. I never saw it that way. I did see it as a different view, especially now that I've spoken about anger and protest and all those activities and those emotions have its place in fighting the ills of society. It's an important part. We can maybe even say it's 95% important of the whole thing. And I'm exaggerating for effect, but like I mentioned in the previous episode, the rage and the protests and we don't care about the details. This thing needs to be put into the light so that it can move forward, because it hasn't been moving forward. That is very important. Same like, I feel like in the case of Fees Must Fall, the students who had to burn stuff and throw stuff and break stuff and close down the country. A lot of people might not agree with the modus operandi, but you have to admit that if that didn't happen, the ball would have not moved forward. That's why you have to at least accept that the passion of the youth, or what do you call it, the willingness of the youth to put their lives on the line, and that recklessness, leave the negative connotation to it, but the recklessness of the youth is sometimes important to move society forward. But at some point, those tactics, once they've gotten us, once the emotion, the anger have gotten us so far, a different fighter must take over. If you are, I don't know much about chess strategy and whatever, but I know what the moves do. If you're a pawn, you go out there, you like damage, let's just cause chaos, whatever we do, so that the guys behind us also will be sacrificed in the fight, or whatever the case may be, will also put their bodies on the line, but use different strategy. Now, I'm not saying you're born and you are less important, pawns are important, not important, no. I just think where Penuel was coming from is that now that the thing is in the light, let's look at the details so that you are not found confused if no one gets convicted. Also, a court can't send someone to jail or sentence them or find them guilty if itself is not sure, at least 95% sure. If you are 60% sure that someone did something, there's not enough surety to send them to jail or to find them guilty for anything. So now that this thing is in the light, and I guess we are discussing in public because we don't have all the information from the police. We don't know who's been investigated. We don't know who's a suspect. And I'm not talking about the Cwecwe case. I'm talking about every case. Look at the Omatoso case. Look at the Omatoso case. Rage got the case so far. Anger got the case so far. Before we blame the system for finding him innocent, that's how reasonable doubt works. Do we know what the homie was actually charged with? Do we know? Because even this dynamic of, there was a power dynamic, so I didn't feel I could say no, or there was a that gap, I didn't know. Those things are tricky to prove. Those things are tricky to not prove, but to legislate, especially if someone grabbed you, pulled you into the bush. That's simple, that's clear cut. We must at least accept that it's a more difficult thing if someone appeared to give consent but internally was protesting. Yes, there are homies who will take advantage of that. There are homies who will take advantage of a situation of their power. And then even amongst that, there's a distinction between those who are just morally wrong and those who are criminally wrong. And I think the difficulty is distinguishing that with proof, or it's difficult. It's difficult. And you hate to bring up false allegations in the situation. False allegations and running with narratives are things that detract from the whole thing. So sometimes if someone who is so inclined sees that, yo guys, procedurally and the way we're going about this thing might be off, and it will cause us to lose the case. Now, for example, the insistence that the principal had to do with the actual SA of the child with such vigor and such surety or such conviction that this guy did something is crazy. Just because he's been handling it administratively wrong, because another thing was because these things are so sensitive and any small thing that you do can be misinterpreted. Sometimes you behave in the exact way that you're not supposed to. Like, you're accused of something, you don't know how to act not guilty, you don't know how to act in a manner, so you just end up looking guilty anyway. And maybe you are guilty, but sometimes innocent people can look guilty for the fear of looking guilty. They say in like lie detector tests and all these things, that lie detector tests and behavioral psychologists, they say people who lie and people who are afraid of of sounding like they're lying. The ones who aren't lying. There's people who lie. There's people who aren't lying, but they're so scared that they will sound like they're lying. They show the same signs. They have the same, what they call this thing in poker. They have the same tells. Now the sleg thing is academic or intelligent people like Darren Campher, which I love, and I love his content, and I like his views. And he's actually the person that's in many ways have given like MK such legitimacy in terms of clear thinking and all that. But I think this aspect of us being leftists, I consider myself left progressive, but this aspect of us, of anything that seems slightly counter to what we're saying or what we're fighting for, we attack it with like the ferocity of cancel culture. And I think we must understand, we must learn from America. We are all left. There's a lot of left, center-left people who voted for Trump because of that practice of ostracizing someone for having a different opinion or a different way of doing things, and accusing them of being evil for wanting to approach this thing in a different way. I'm not only talking about the Cwecwe case, I'm talking about everything. Now you are shaming the rest of us who are thinking similarly, like, yo guys, there's a gap here. Guys, we're not seeing this thing. Like, I see we're all going that way, but that might be a trap. Now you're scared to talk now. You're scared to talk. No one's going to talk now to say, yo man, in order for us to get to the bottom of this, we need to think of it. We need to be able to step back at some point and think of it logically now. Yes, there's time for the rage, and then there's time for let's step back. I'm not saying we're all going to be lawyers or we all must be lawyers or think like lawyers. We're not experts of the court. Whether we've seen Oscar Victoria's trial or we saw Omotoso's trial, we're not experts. But guys, we should not get into the culture of silencing people for having different opinions. That's why white people are so enraged right now. Because for years we've been telling them to keep quiet just because they have a different idea on how to go about something. Now, flop is we silence people who could help, who have a different view. We've been preaching diversity, and that diversity of thought, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of approach has always been better for the group. So let's not shame people to be scared to speak up. Yes, let's call out people for suggesting hate, suggesting evil, and all these things. Which brings me to my next topic, Nota's apology. I'm glad he didn't apologize. I think we all knew he would do it, whether he meant it or not. Nota would do an apology for, I think he was calling for killing and white people, and he was calling white people Neanderthals and inferior beings, and saying black people are superior. I don't think he even meant it or believed it. But I do believe the Human Rights Commission was right to force him to apologize, and in detail what he's apologizing for. I saw a clip. It's hard to find where the apology is in the episode of Nota Mondays on DJ's Boost podcast. But they were right to force him to do that, and I think he really did face jail time, and he understood that. But same like shoot to kill, the farmer, all those things. Those things, and even Nota's utterances, I was never supposed to inspire any murder or anything. I don't think they should do it, though. Its intent has always been to irritate and agitate and to make alive or make apparent how disgruntled black people are or poor people are. So glad you apologized. I agree that all sides, we must call it out when stuff are clearly hateful or could easily be interpreted as hate. Should step away for it in the spirit of good faith, in the spirit of let's figure this thing out together. Now, on the flip side, it's hard to do that as a black person or person of color if it appears that the white upper class, rich class aren't doing the same. It's difficult to not sing those songs when you are out there perpetuating a misinformation. But we've spoken about this 1,000 times. I haven't saw robbers of Kali Kriel, Ernst Root. All of them you haven't noticed it, but all of them are toning down their messages slightly and fixing the narrative. But also at the same time, they are leaving. There's a time when I said, when you participate in a lie, if you don't correct the lie, you are part of the lie. What was I saying? In closing. So, the hate speech, happy homie apologized. Hopefully him and someone like Kali Kriel or Ernst Roots can talk to each other. Let them fight, let them argue. In good faith though. Express your frustrations. Don't not get angry. But don't press someone down. Because you are creating a hero when you're doing that. And if we continue to, or what appears to, try to suppress white culture or refuse to hear them slightly, we are creating heroes, which is what is happening in America. That leftist tactics, yes, we are fighting for the right thing. We are fighting for the right thing. Our heart's in the right place. But that thing of being so scared of different views and opinions, or at least attempting to hear what other people are trying to say, that thing doesn't work. These guys are slowly, I don't know if they're going to admit it, we'd like for them to admit that they went about it the wrong way. The Afrikaner groups and advocates hope they can admit that they've gone about the things the wrong way. But I have noticed they are slowly retracting and slowly dropping the narrative of white genocide. No one is outright corrected. What's his homie? Elon Musk. Then as for Trump, sanctions this, sanctions that, a son. I really thought the Trump presidency was gonna be good for South Africa, but let's see how it pans out. Might still be, but not in the way that we thought. Because when the rand does well, I believe that's when the dollar does well, the rand also tends to do better. But that's a conversation for another day. And if you are still listening, thank you for tuning in. This is the On the Contrary podcast. Be sure to subscribe, comment, let us know what you think, or let me know what you think. I do experience all types of comments, and I reply to all of them. I'm small enough to still attend to all of these things one by one. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. Like the video, share, do what you must. Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the On the Contrary podcast.
Am I allowed to swear in here?
In Sweden.
Yeah, I know we said let's not blame the government.
It's just sad when we start them becoming indoctrinated.
Your view on me.